Hello, everyone. For those of you that have dialed in, this is what a real David Grover looks like. Say hello, David.
Hello, David.
Instead of this one, this is the fake David Grover.
Oh, the fake David.
You were reduced to a piece of paper last week. Or Monday. It wasn't last week, it was Monday.
Yeah,
It feels
sorry
like a week
about
ago. So, hi to everyone that's online. Paul is still in his camper van in Italy. So, what we got? Denmark, Italy, Malaysia, Venice, Nottingham, loads of different places. Some people have, you'll be pleased to know, David, updated last night in Capture One.
Excellent. Good.
Some people are holding off on updating from Capture One, apparently.
Right.
So, hopefully, we'll cover some of that today. One of the reasons for getting David online today specifically is obviously because we're going to talk through the latest build. Which is the 13.1 or 20.1. Whenever you guys want to sort that version numbering out, we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's the version that we're going to be using today. That's the version that people hopefully have downloaded if they've already got version 20. And it's a free update for those people. The two key big benefits that were introduced in that were the heal and clone changes, which were quite a big re-engineering feat, and before and after. So before we go any further into this session, I'm just going to let David share his screen. It might be a little bit of a lag, but he can quickly just recap at a very high summary level what came in those two updates.
Sure.
So there is David's screen. You should all see.
Correct. Yep. So this is an enhancement, I guess you would say, of an existing feature that was quite limited. So in the layers tool, let's just fly this out for a second. There was always the ability to do healing and cloning. Healing being covering up a blemish or an artifact or removing something. Cloning being a like-for-like pixel copying. But the big limitation, and I'm sure you'll agree, Paul, that it was a big limitation,
Yep.
is that each layer, whether it was a heal layer or a clone layer, could only have one source point. So if you had, multiple areas to heal, then it would be very difficult to do a complete healing process in Capture One, unless it was just something super basic like a water spot on the lens or one or two items that you wanted to get rid of.
Yeah, we used to, I covered it on Monday's session, but we used to actually end up recommending to people, they created all these different layers of left to right heal, right to left heal, up down heal, for all the different source points, and it just got to become a mess.
Does become complicated, and in the end it was just probably far easier and far quicker to go into Photoshop or
Yep.
Affinity Photo or something like that and do it there and round trip back to Capture One. So but now that major limitation is removed, and a slight change in how the brush versus layer works. So previously you would create a heal layer or a clone layer, which is still the case here, but you would have a universal brush which would kind of change its behavior based on the layer that you have. Now we have a universal erase brush, but you have the choice of creating new heal layers or clone layers, and there's two new brushes, which is the heal brush and the clone brush, like so. Now, very quickly, in terms of how it works, it's a case of grabbing, I want to heal some spots, right click for our brush settings, and then let's just, Laura has pretty good skin, should pick a better subject really, draw once, and then Capture One will automatically pick a source point and then get rid of your spot, and that is an unlimited number of points that you can do as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that certainly I've noticed, and we covered on a video we posted this week, was there is a scenario now, because the heal brush is unlimited, and it's truly unlimited, there is a scenario where you could potentially use this for all of the dust spot erasing that you want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Because actually it's a better tool than the dust spot eraser. That's quite a blunt tool, whereas this is a bit more specific. And we haven't found the limit for how many spots you can cover.
No, and there is no theoretical limit, and performance-wise, you don't really see an issue of performance slowdown once you're doing, multiple spots. And the limitation with the spot tool is that it's only a circular shape, whereas with this tool, if you want to do something, non-circular or a straight line, so for example, a hairline or something like that, let's fix that so it's a better spot, then you can do so. So. Yeah. whereas the spot is just literally a spot.
I was just going to say as well, if anyone's got any questions for David while we're going through today's session, you've basically got 55 minutes remaining to get them to him.
Right.
So send them in, and then we'll add them to the list.
Excellent.
So then after that, the other big update was then obviously the before-after change, which was significant.
Yes. So now, if you don't see this on your toolbar, by the way, you can go to Window Workspace Default, and then that will switch to the new default workspace. But if you have already changed some of the configuration on your workspace, you should find an entry down here as well, which shows you your old customized workspace.
Yeah.
So very simply put, again, before a limitation of seeing before and after in Capture One, you sort of had to do a key combination with the reset icon, which isn't very practical. Now you can either just tap this and see before and after, just for a simple view. If you long press, you can change to a split view, which you might prefer, which gives you this nice draggable slider to see in between, like so. And the easy shortcut Y on your keyboard, just to switch between the two states. And again, if that doesn't work, you've probably got your own custom keyboard shortcut.
Yeah, you've overwritten the Y button.
Yeah. So Y, I think, previously in Capture One 10 was to add and remove a star rating or a favorite. I'm not sure actually, but now if you just type before, like so, you can see the changes here, like so.
Cool. Andy has just asked, is it possible to edit in Photoshop using smart albums now? To do the round trip, I don't believe it is. No, that wasn't a change that was cited for this release. So what, it was Andy, wasn't it? Yeah.
Was saying. I don't know if I have a smart album kicking around, but you couldn't do a round trip once you were in a smart album, purely because, and the reason or the logic behind that was that when you round trip, Capture One wants to place that file next to the original. And now you could argue we could still do that with a smart album. I think the issue was, what's the criteria of the smart album? Because if the smart album was, say, searching on metadata or something like that, how would you get it to show in the smart album? Would you then have to override what the smart album is doing for a round-tripped image? Or would you have to somehow apply the same criteria to that round trip?
But so it will work from a regular album. So regular album's fine, but just not the smart album where there's the filtering going on.
And the best thing to do, if you're in a smart album, right click and just say show in library, and that will show you exactly where that shot is in the library. So if we do right click, show in library, so it's in this folder, and then it's taking me straight to that shot. So now I can right click and say edit with, like so.
Cool.
But it was just really that the issue of trying to determine how would you apply the same criteria to your edit with photo to a smart album. So
cool.
Which might break it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch into Capture One here, so that everyone can see this screen, and you should see a David and me. Yep, we're still there. We didn't lose him. So on this screen, these are some of you guys' images. One quick question before we get going. Another one's just come in. Have you corrected the bug about inverting a luminosity mask? So...
wasn't a bug.
Right. Let's take a little moment to explain. It's actually a good question. It's a good question. It's a shame that David's here to hear it. So, it's fair to say David and I disagree on this subject.
Yeah. But I did have the same experience as you when first using it. Yeah.
So
I can easily appreciate how you would come to that conclusion.
And I'm still right. However, logically this makes sense. So, just to explain, a couple of sessions ago we did a mask that we inverted, and we were expecting the luminosity to also invert. So in other words, as we'd selected everything that was dark, then it should select everything that's light, because obviously you've inverted the mask. That makes sense in my head. In a logical sense, though, what we have to do is make sure that we're separating the two out. So the luminosity range, or luma range, is not the mask. So the mask is a layer, and that mask can be a gradient, it can be a brush mask, it can be whatever we choose, but it is effectively if you picture it in the red terms that we have as default here, it's the red dots all over the screen.
Yep.
The Luma range then decides which of those red dots are now relevant based on a range of brightnesses that are in the histogram. So when we go to invert mask, we are literally doing that. We're inverting, in default terms, unless you've changed the color, but we're inverting the red mask.
Yes.
But the Luma range is still applied on top of that. So if I have the top half of the image in mask and the bottom part of the image not in mask, and I say Luma range anything that's bright, if I invert the mask, it's going to go the opposite. So the top of the image is now not masked, the bottom of the image is masked, but the Luma range is still only going to select the things that are bright or dark, depending on what I've put in.
Yep.
So it's not a bug. I would prefer it to work a different way. I understand the reason why it works that way. But yeah, so effectively what you've got to do in your head is divorce the two. One is a drawing of a mask and a covering of a layer. The other is a application of selecting brightness out of whatever mask you've got. So if I invert the mask is going to flip, but the filter of which brightnesses you're affecting is going to stay the same.
Yes.
The way to flip it would be to go into the Luma mask and just reverse the values effectively. But yeah, I would look forward to the option of inverting the Luma mask as well. Hint. So let's go into one of these sessions, one of these images. So actually, I'm going to start with quite a cool scene here. So this is a city scene. Ralph sent a load of images in, and we didn't get to them last week, unfortunately, because we were a bit busy talking about the new features.
Sure.
So in here we've got, and this actually happens quite a lot in cities. While the scene may not be a big landscape, this is a really good example of being able to change the feel of a picture with a couple of slides. So I'm just going to put these up on the screen because a couple of people have said, quite rightly, does it help to rasterize the mask before inverting? Yes, you can rasterize the mask, etc. Yeah. So going back to the Luma mask thing, absolutely yes, you can. So once you've done your mask and once you've set your Luma range, you can rasterize that mask. However, you've now removed the ability to do any calculated mask changes. So I can no longer tweak the Luma range, and I can know if it was a gradient, for example, I can no longer tweak that gradient. So as they say, life's about choices, as it were, but absolutely you can rasterize the mask and then reverse it, because what the rasterization does is it applies the Luma range to that effectively. However, as a result of doing that, you're not going to be able to make any changes later on. You would be able to put a new Luma range on top, but the mask is going to be fixed.
And there is an invert range button in the Luma range.
Yes, within the tool.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
just
want
that's
the way to do it as well.
Just give me a button that says invert. Okay, so where were we? We were at the cityscape. So what happens quite often in city, and actually, funnily enough, this is a new problem for us. One of the problems that we have now is LED lights. So if you remember years ago when you used to shoot cities, they would all be yellow. It was all sodium lamps. It was all the murky, yellowy, reddy, orangey tones and so on. Now in a city, you've got such a different range of lights that you end up with greens and slightly blues and slightly yellows, and then the pure white, obviously, of completely white LEDs. So there's a feel about.
A street light has a particularly good CRI rating in terms of color accuracy or anything like that. So it does.
Yeah. Well, if I look down my street, all the street lights that were installed at the same time, they're all different colors.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a bit of a challenge when it comes to that. Now, what we can do is obviously you could just reduce one of the color levels. So in this case, for example, let me just put on some fringing correction as well, because I remember seeing a couple of bits at the edges. But what I could do in this scene, I could just literally create a new adjustment layer, filled layer, and I could go down to my color editor, choose this green area here, and I could either do it with the mouse on the screen, or I could just pull down that saturation of the green, and instantly we've got rid of one of those problems. So there's a really, really quick way of doing this, which is basically just get rid of the color that you don't want. So in the case of the street lights near where I live, some of them are quite yellow, some of them are quite green. I could get rid of that. The problem with it is obviously if you're then taking a picture of grass or something in the background, you've just got rid of the green grass. So we can do some stuff around making the light more uniform. We can do that with the skin tone tool. But ultimately, when it comes to city stuff, actually most of this is done with a very, very drastic but important, white balance change. So cameras now, unfortunately, when they're getting all their white balance calculations going on, if you have as David said, if all the CRI ratings for all the lights around are steady and even, then it makes the camera's job really easy. In this scene, let's take the example. So the camera's looking at, okay, what's white? And it's seeing some bits of green, some bits of blue, some bits of yellow, some bits of purple, so it's going to be all over the place. With cities at night specifically, you have to cool them down. The camera will always try and make them a bit warmer. So I'm going to pull this down to something like there, and we've got to move the tint more towards the red and the magenta side rather than the green. The reason is it's just to counter the fact that the camera's trying to be clever and trying to work out what that white balance should be, and invariably I've not seen one camera that doesn't warm up an image inappropriately at night, and it doesn't add a green tint. So always with cities, I end up always having to shift the tint a little bit to the magenta side, so positive value, and cool down that Kelvin. And actually, personally, I would go further with this one. I would be more into this sort of camp here. Let's do our handy before and after. So we go from a sort of, and you can see now how green and murky that first image started out compared to where we get to with just two little slider changes. Out here we've got a huge amount of highlights. Some of them are overexposed for sure, and we can't do anything about the overexposed stuff. I have a bit of a challenge with a lot of people criticize night shots because, for instance, the street light is overexposed. Well, yes, because it's a street light. I'm pointing the camera at a light source.
Yeah, you're not going to see the light bulb in the street light if you were standing below it and looking up. Yeah.
Well, certainly with one exposure as well. That's
exactly.
That's the challenge. So obviously there's a place for bracketing and so on, but in reality, in this case, we can just use that high dynamic range slider on the left, pull the highlights down, pull the whites down, and actually the amount of extra detail we've got in there is huge, just from that one little change. So again, two sliders effectively for high dynamic range. On this shot in particular, I wouldn't actually pull them. So quite often in night scenes, we try and pull our shadows up. Let me just move that there. Try and pull shadows up. We try and pull blacks up. That can make it look flat, which is a problem. So on this one, I'd actually pull the blacks down just a touch. So just really deepen those shadows. Deepen the darkest parts of the image. And remember, the black slider is only affecting the very, very bottom left-hand side of the histogram. It's not everything in that lower quarter. It's just the very end, just the darkest parts of the picture. And then the shadow pull, well, we can go in like this and make it a little bit darker, but I'm sort of in a place of around there, sort of evens it out. And then we've got one thing that's actually really bugging me with this picture. And it's horrible. I'm getting a name for being the Keystone bloke. But the Keystone on this upsets me a little bit. And it's not because it's taken wrong. There's no way you could take this shot without it keystoning with a standard lens. It's not possible. You're looking up. So we've got the tool in Capture One to fix it. One thing I am going to make everyone clear on, because we missed this a couple of sessions ago, is this amount in Keystone. So the default in Capture One is to have this to 80. I end up having mine at 100. Personal choice again. The 80 is designed so that you don't go too far. It's a way of sort of softening it to keep the image looking natural. If you're doing a very big wide city scene or one that's looking down over a city, you don't want everything perfectly straight because it loses perspective. So it makes sense what Capture One has as a default. In this case, if you've got one big feature that should be straight in the image, then it sort of makes sense that it should be at 100% because the change I'm going to make, I want it to be perfectly straight. So to check our Keystone, I've got a grid option, obviously, but it's actually a lot easier to use guides on Keystone to check the result. The grid obviously fits where the grid wants to sit. We can increase the number of lines that are in it, but it's never going to be exactly where the building is. So personally, I've turned off my grid. For now, we'll turn off the guides. And again, we don't have a perfect place to pull these two, but what I can do is sort of guesstimate a little bit here. That's cool there. That looks about straight. And here. And what I'm looking at is this line here. On the right-hand side, we've got a really handy cheat, which is the reflections. So reflections in water, unless the water is on a hill, work that one out.
Possible?
Reflections generally are straight down. They're the opposite of what's ahead of them. So if you've got a reflection, it's a great tool to use for a keystone because you can extend that line from the building all the way down through the reflection. On the left-hand side, we don't have it. So what I'm having to do is I'm having to assume that Ralph took this image level. Because if he did, then it means that I can pretty much mimic where the right-hand side one is to the left-hand side and say, actually, they should be about right. If I hit apply, it's done a pretty good job. Again, it's set to 80 here. If I set that to 100, it's now going to go, frankly, more extreme. If I pull up my guide and look at where this red line sits, I'm just going to apply that. Look at where my red line sits on this guide, and actually it's right along that building. That's pretty good. So, again, if I'd used 80, it wouldn't be quite right. If I'd used 80, we might have the building. In fact, let's just show you. In fact, we're at 80 there for some reason. Let me just put that back to 100. Strange. And apply that. Why has that gone to 80 there, David?
Has it just switched again? Did you reapply it a second time, maybe? Yeah, maybe that was it. Where it reverted to the default, perhaps.
So Keystone there.
Yeah.
Set to 100. That's correct on the screen.
Yeah.
Hit apply. Resets to 80.
Oh, you don't need to press apply again. Because you'd applied it once already, I believe.
No. Yeah, but now if I go there, okay, it hits it. So why would the reply hit the 80? Different time. We'll raise that as a support request. Yeah. I'm gonna talk about that later actually because I've got to.
You can change the default.
Yeah, we can set that to 100 all the time.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, in this particular image, we're in a place where I'm just going to change the crop a little bit because I want this corner here to actually hit the corner of the shot. Ideally, we might not quite be able to do it without losing some of the buildings, so I'm not going to have that luxury, unfortunately. But where we could get to very easily is there. And then there's one final thing that we'd want to do, which is just put on some clarity. So clarity for cityscapes makes them pop. It's that simple. It makes all those midtones, all the murky stuff, just a little more clear, hence the name. And what we get is a really, really cool sharpness in all of these buildings and all these windows and all the texture around here. So let's create a clone of that and reset it. We go from there to there. And again, all we've done, we've cooled the image down and fixed some of the tint. We've corrected the HDR, the highlights and the white, so we've pulled back the dynamic range that the camera actually stored. So we're not creating anything that wasn't there, we're just actually getting back the data that the camera had in the first place. Then we've corrected the keystone on the building, so it's not leaning, it's not moving away from us, it looks straight up, it's a piece of architecture there. And then finally we've just boosted everything with a bit of clarity, and that was it. So, I've got some other questions in. David got quite a few questions in. So, where are we? Let's just, if I miss some, we will come back and cover them in the comments later on. Where are we? One idea for future updates. If you use the Keystone tool and try to line up with some walls or something, it would be cool to have a shortcut and it would zoom to 300% to the ball.
Yeah, it would be nice. Or like a loop on the crosshair.
Yeah,
like
a little magnifier
on the crosshair, so you can align nicely. You don't have to be super accurate. Like I think I've heard you say it before, Paul. Like in the middle of the shot, then it becomes more critical. But if your lines are spaced further out, then the multiplication of error is much less.
Let's show you. So obviously out here we've done it at the edges here. If I make a tiny little change to this line here and go to apply, you saw it hardly moved. It's a tiny little change. However, the mistake a lot of people make is they see the most useful vertical thing is near the middle of the screen.
Yeah,
so we then pull these into the middle.
To picking the giant building, I guess, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So let's just pull sort of, I'm just using it as an example, but let's pull there and apply that. That's good. Now if I make that same tiny little change, you're going to get a very big distortion. And it's because it's all about the angles. So the further away from the center I am, that 0.2 degrees, 0.1 degrees is only having a tiny effect on the overall picture. In the middle, 0.1 degrees, 0.2 degrees makes a big difference to the outside.
And that's a good tip about the 80 to 100 as well, because we edited one of your shots a few weeks ago, which was looking down over... I think it was Shanghai or Beijing, and I think we actually went less than 80 in the end because when it was too straight, it just looked unnatural because looking down on it, you'd expect it to fall away to some extent. So
Exactly.
there is no perfect default, I suppose.
No.
Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah, good idea. There was another one as well. When deleting files, it would be good to have an option to send to trash bin or delete from disk rather than the two-step process.
You can, actually.
Okay, there we go.
So,
do you want me to switch to David's screen so you can have a look?
Yeah, sure.
There we go.
So you see down here, it depends on what your shortcuts are set up, but this is a variant. So hang on, let's just pick this shot, for example. So I can delete from album, I can move it to the trash, or I can take it straight out of the disk. So
you could obviously change those shortcuts to something that
you can change those shortcuts. So if I say delete from disk, I then get a second. Are you sure? Yeah. Remove from catalog, delete from disk, and so on. So just set up the shortcuts to what you feel is comfortable, or if you're uncomfortable with having a shortcut that deletes something, then you could remove them because then you can't accidentally get rid. So, yeah.
Cool. So there you go. Your question delivered. Okay, I'll go back to some other ones in a second. There was one thing as well before we go into the next image. As a general point, and to be honest, I am the worst person at this because unfortunately I'm one of the annoying people that emails David when there's an issue, and some of the time it's me being an idiot, some of the time it's the software. Genuinely, and I see this a lot, especially out on Facebook now, there are so many groups that are doing Capture One support and Capture One technical forum and Capture One creative and so on. Just bear in mind, you're not necessarily talking to the people at Capture One. So quite often those people are dipping into those forums and having a look, and they do take it into consideration, the stuff that's on there. I've seen it happen. But just bear in mind that you're not raising a support request. So if you have a problem with Capture One, you have to go onto their support site, and for two reasons. Number one, it's the only way it's going to be seen officially. Number two, if there is a bigger problem, the more people that talk about the same problem, the more of a red light it turns on in Copenhagen, and people start to react a bit faster. So just bear in mind when you're talking on Facebook in these groups, they're wonderful because they're peer-to-peer support, and there's lots of. I dip into them every now and then and try and help out and whatever. But if you want the official Capture One support line, then you've got to go direct to the source. Don't rely on the Facebook groups to put your bugs up.
And there's no harm in doing both. Like if I had an issue, I would immediately post it to the manufacturer's support portal, whatever that may be, and then I would go and have a nose around in the forums as well, and then you get the best of both worlds. So I always make a support case first, because the longer you leave it, of course, the more delayed you are in getting an official response. So even if you fix the problem in the interim, doesn't matter. You just might as well get that official support case logged ASAP.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to a very different picture. So sunset in Cologne, I think. Yeah, that's Cologne, because that's the famous buildings. So again, nothing wrong with. So out of the camera, nothing wrong with this picture. I would guess it's possibly got a graduated filter on the top. I'm not exactly sure, but one of the ways I'm making that assumption making that assessment is looking at the histogram up in the top left of our image. A lot of the pro guides that we've done recently have focused so much on the histogram because, frankly, it's the most useful tool for a lot of the decision making that we go through when we're editing a picture. So a lot of people will look at the picture, they'll look at there's the exposure evaluation tool and whatever else, even things like exposure warning. So I've got mine set to magenta. But again, and actually I had to cover this last week, the exposure warning doesn't necessarily tell you that something is actually overexposed. What it's telling you is one of the channels out of red, green or blue or more is hitting the threshold that you've set. So in this case here, let me just go onto this little pink dot with my cursor. So I've got a threshold that's set quite low on here because we were demonstrating some stuff earlier. It's giving me a little warning here to say we're overexposed. As I put my mouse over, if I look at the top of the screen underneath where it says cursor tools, we've got, Ralph's just confirmed no filter at all. Cool, good dynamic range in the camera.
Yeah, well done, Ralph.
So basically, that warning is saying to us one or more of the RGB channels has hit the threshold that you've set. And the threshold is set in your preferences. So if I go to Capture One Preferences, under Exposure, we can choose where these sit on this line. So obviously, the lower I put my exposure warning, the more and more things are going to highlight to say, uh-oh, you're clipping. And by clipping, it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't mean you've lost all the data. It's just saying it's getting near to the point where one of those channels is now maxed out. You can also turn on a shadow warning, which a lot of people don't use. The shadow warning does the exact opposite, so it's telling you where there's data that's approaching 0, in my case, or slightly higher if you want to set your threshold there. As default, I think exposure is set to like 250 or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
But you know, you can whack it up to 255 if you want. So in this stuff, what I can do, and I'm relying on the dynamic range in Ralph's camera here, as I move my exposure down, we're going to see all of those little warnings for highlights start to disappear, and all of our warnings for shadows start to appear because I turned the shadow warning on. And if I zoom out, so here we've got, if I put it up, there's all of our highlights, and if I put it down, here's all of my shadows. So these are great as warnings, but I don't need them because I can see it on the histogram.
Yeah.
So for all these, and this is why I've just gone to painstaking lengths to show you what that does. And now I'm going to say turn it off, because your eyes can see whether there's data in an image, and it is that simple. And immediately we can see on a histogram whether something is blown out or underexposed because we see all the data crushed towards that end. So if I take the exposure and whack it down, we could see visually on the histogram, let alone if I could turn that picture off and still tell you that's an underexposed picture. Yeah. And likewise, if I move the exposure up, I can tell you that there are elements of that picture that are overexposed just looking at that histogram. So what we can see in here, even without the warnings, is actually we're in pretty good shape to start with. That's the goal. We want to get as much data as we can, and we don't want to overcook stuff. So first thing, let's just crop it a little bit. I'm probably going to go even 1:2 on here. Now, just to be clear, and this is one of the things that a lot of city photographers and landscape photographers, for that matter, I'm just going to hide my browser. So Command B on your keyboard and the browser disappears. We get a bigger screen. A lot of city people have a problem with this. When you're shooting to something that goes away from you, and even on this case, you know, a tilt shift lens isn't going to help you a massive amount either because it's so far away. The temptation that people have is to try and make this line level. Because, well, it is level, right? But it's not in perspective terms. And especially in this shot where we've got this bridge that goes across here. If I were to straighten this image, and I've seen someone do this recently, they just went like that along the horizon because it's automatic. We straighten to the horizon. Okay, wonderful.
Slightly wonky cathedral.
So just bear in mind, it's a bit like Keystone. Bear in mind, it needs to feel real. It needs to feel like your eyes would see it, and your eyes would see it disappearing off into the horizon. So in this particular case, there is no need to straighten it. We actually have a nice, if I pull my guide up, we've got a nice straight line across this bridge. That looks pretty good. So genuinely, please be very careful with straightening tools. I'm just going to add that horizontal one back in. Be very careful with straightening tools when they're needed. Because if you're shooting straight out to horizon and the whole image is tilted, then use it. But when you've got perspective, just be very careful because it's more of a Keystone issue than a straighten issue in the first place. Just got a thing. Okay, there's a couple of questions I'm going to come back to from Simon and Emil. We'll come on to that in a second. But first off, let's just have a quick play with Ralph's shot. F8, we don't need diffraction correction, it's fine. It's picked up the lens correctly, which is great. I'm just going to do this analyze again, so I'm recommending to everyone now that they just use this feature.
Yeah, definitely.
The lens profiles that are in Capture One are great. I think David would promote that.
Yes.
So, however, there is an issue where the profile that's used in Capture One is actually a standard manufacturer profile for a lens on a camera in a lab in Copenhagen when they're measuring it.
Yep.
Lenses have slight deviations, effectively. For some reason, David, I can't hear you again, which is a bit strange.
Oh, no? Did you lose me?
Why can I not hear you?
I think your input might have changed.
Bit odd. You're not muted, are you?
Nope. I'm okay.
Okay. I'm going to ask a favour of everyone. Can everyone just let me know if you can hear David talking?
Hello, everyone.
I need to wait 10 seconds to check that. Maybe there's something weird going on, but I don't know what it is. We can hear David okay. It's just me.
Yeah, just you.
How odd. Let me switch.
Maybe the AirPods died. How about now?
Now I can hear you.
Oh, that's strange.
Wow. Okay. Right. And now,
Is that did your AirPods die?
I don't know, but I've now got an entire feed of comments saying, yes, we can hear him, we can hear him, we can hear him. Okay. So,
Good.
right, good. We're back on. Cool. Thank you, everyone. So, the lens profiles, sorry, that were in there. Every lens is different. And every camera sensor is different and so on. And there's a very, very clever trick that Capture One has built inside of it, which is the ability to analyze the chromatic aberration that comes from a lens. And on this case, we're going to click Analyze.
You can also do this on a batch. You don't have to do
it. Yeah.
Singularly. Yeah. So you can select your
you can select all of the images and analyze through. But what will happen is you'll see this change now to say the name of the file rather than just the default in there, and that's now analyze the chromatic aberration for this lens on this sensor and this particular shot. As Dan has just pointed out, that's what happens when you turn 40, you lose your hearing. Wonderful. Touche. So, with our lens correction done, let's just go on to our exposure tab. I am going to put in 2 graduated filters, and for no reason of trying to correct anything or anything like that. It's just the fact that I want to pull the attention into the middle part and away from the top. So at the moment, we've got a print that effectively gets brighter as it goes away from the middle, and that's fine. But I think we're going to find this is a lot cooler when we pull these in. So I'm clicking on a graduated or gradient filter. I haven't created a layer. I don't need to for the first time I do a gradient filter. I'm just going to click here and it will create the layer on the left-hand side. Drag down. I don't have my mask on, which is a little bit naughty for showing people. So let's just turn the mask on. And I'm going to drag down. Now, for people that struggle with the angles of this stuff, just hold down the Shift key and it will mean that it snaps to 45-degree increments. And in this case, we want it to come straight down, no problem. I want it to stop before we get involved in these buildings, really. So just have a subtle fade off here and turn that mask off. And then with that, I'm just going to pull down the exposure. I don't have to worry about using brightness because in this particular area, we know that nothing's going to go off the left-hand side of that, that histogram. But I can pull up some saturation. So the effect, especially in quite a dull sky, is as I pull down the brightness, I also make it look murky and lose some of the color. So as a result of that, what we do is just do a tiny bit of saturation boost up there. What we can do as well is independently change the white balance in the sky. Now, please don't go too far. No, just no. But what we can do
like a postcard.
It is, yeah. Slightly more blue, slightly more pinky sky. So if I turn that off, it goes from this sort of yellowy, murky, misty color to something that's a bit more vibrant. I'm just going to reduce the amount that we've done there, just there, to keep it natural. Okay. Another layer. So I don't want it filled because I'm going to use the gradient again. So just going to click on a layer. It's going to give me an empty layer here. This one we're going to call sky, so we don't get confused. This one we're going to call water. On the water layer, again, so drawing up a mask, and remember I turned the mask off, but I know I want to stop there. So if I turn the mask on again, you can see. In fact, I'm going to go a little bit further up. And with this mask, you see these two are equal, so the distance is equal. If I hold down the Option key on one of the edges of the mask, I can independently control these two edges. So I don't have to have them equidistant apart. I can actually have them completely asymmetrical. Yeah. Now, turn the mask off. I can then also pull down our exposure a little bit here, but I'm also going to pull off any clarity. So you see the difference? So there's our water with all that clarity. By using negative clarity, which a lot of people don't like doing, but I'm starting to like it a lot now, we can smooth the water atoms towards us. Again, we've lost a little bit of saturation by doing the exposure change, so I'm just going to boost that up a little bit there. But effectively, let's just pull up a... I'm not going to do before and after, although it's a wonderful feature. I just want to pull them up side by side. Effectively, these two feel the same, but they obviously are rather different just through those two changes. Okay, so in here as well, we've got some shadow work that we need to pull up. I know there's detail in here, so these are really, really quick and easy clicks. We're just going to pull up our shadows in here. Now, actually, the shadows... Oh, sorry, I'm on my water layer. That was silly. Background. Shadows, we're going to pull up there, and black, we're going to pull up... So, let's just think about what the shadows and black sliders are doing. In this area here, these parts are the darkest parts of the image. So let's just reset both of these. So these are clearly in the blacks area. So if I pull up the shadows, yes, it's going to affect them. But most importantly, if I pull up the blacks, it's only going to affect them. So this is the other thing as well with shadows and blacks. I think people have got into this mode of thinking that the shadows is a separate area to blacks, David.
Yes.
So because you used to have just shadows and highlights, and now there's shadows, highlights, whites, and blacks, I think people think we've separated it into 4 different discrete areas, and they're not. So blacks is a subset of shadows.
Shadows, exactly.
So shadows is everything in the bottom, let's say 25%-ish, something like that.
Yep.
Highlights is everything in the top 25%. Whites out of highlights is the very, very top part, so maybe the only top 5%, whereas blacks is the very, very bottom 5%. So if I change shadows, I am affecting blacks. If I change blacks, I'm not necessarily affecting all the shadows.
Yep. Good,
and vice versa.
Good description. Yeah.
So in here, because we knew this wall effectively was in the blacks area, and I don't really want to pull up shadows too much, because if I do that, everything's going to just go flat and cartoony. Ugh. So we're just bringing up the wall, not by too much, just so that we can get some detail. And especially when you go to print this, you want to see the detail on the wall. If I undo that, it's lost. And that's just pulled that detail back. Overall, that's probably where I'd get to in this. Someone has just said, oh, it was Ralph, the person who took the picture. Never thought of changing white balance on the level, on a layer, I'm guessing, you mean. So, just be very careful. Our eyes are very clever. We know what looks right in a picture and what looks wrong in a picture. You need to keep it subtle. So if you are going to change, for instance, the white balance of the sky to the ground, just be really careful that you don't take one to one extreme, one to the other, because it's very easy to spot.
Very easy to spot, and
it just looks horrible.
Edited shot, definitely.
So be very careful with it. However, it can be a really effective tool to be able to change. For example, if you've got a load of buildings down below and a sunset behind it, if I change the white balance to correct the sunset, what you can find is the buildings start to look a bit wrong. So there's nothing stopping you putting a gradient in there and layering it up, or even using luma range to do it, and changing the feel of it. Can you also add negative structure to help smoothing? You can. So clarity and structure do 2 different things. Structure typically is looking for edges and texture. So normally structure is going to have the effect of, and it's an effect of, it's not really, but sharpening or unsharpening something. Whereas clarity is going to have the effect of making a mid-tone more obvious or less obvious. So it's more about, if you have, for example, a rock that you want to get rid of all the texture from, then negative structure would do that. If you had, let me think of another example, concrete is another one, isn't it? So if you shoot against like a brick wall or something, structure is what pulls up all of the texture in the brick. A negative structure would take it away. Clarity is the bit that would make that brick stand out from all the other bricks, versus the lines in between. So in this case, we're not trying to fix lines and edges, we're just trying to fix the overall area. So clarity is going to be more useful than a negative structure, but we can do it. So if I just zoom in here, and let's just go to my structure and do negative structure here, you can see it's not having much of an effect.
No,
so
because it doesn't have that.
There's no edges.
Detail to affect. Yeah.
So, funnily enough, so someone else asked. So that was both Simon and Dan asked the same question. Great minds. So yes, in some cases you can, but not in all. Rogers then said this can be very useful with mixed lighting sources. Absolutely. Yep. So, for example, a lot of, take wedding photographers for example, they'll use color balance gels on top of their flashes to balance out the light that's coming from the flash to, for instance, sunset or the light inside the church. If you don't have that luxury, or you're shooting without flash and so on, you've got 2 different light sources, so you could have the inside of a building and the outside of a building at sunset. You may need a different white balance for 2 parts of the image to make it look like it was shot together. I've seen it before, where you have a picture that looks like it was actually composited because the white balance is different.
And of course, our eyes are very good at naturally balancing different light temperatures anyway. So
and it's funny when
in the real world we see it.
Exactly, in the real world we correct for it. It's only when it's on a picture that we sort of go, huh.
Hang on a minute.
That's not right. Ralph was just asking, can we download our version somewhere if you compare? Yes, Ralph. So afterwards I'll send you an EIP to download. So, and actually I'll cover that in a second, what an EIP is. Let me just go on to here. Eddie, what's the difference between structure and sharpening? David, do you want to give me the official answer, and then I'll tell you how I
would say structure is maybe a bit more like structure. You have to be a little bit mindful of how far you push it. So I think it's powerful, but also dangerous if you push it too far. It can be somewhat crude, if you like.
You can end up with horrible halos around things.
Yeah, exactly. So it's always a bit used with caution, and it's not going to create detail where there is no detail. So it's not a magic bullet for suddenly making everything da-da and super sharp. I would say with sharpening tools, you've got a bit more finesse. So the range of the slider is broader. So you can tweak that to a greater extent. You've also got the ability to control the strength of what the sharpening slider is doing with the radius, so you can make it very fine or very aggressive. And then you also have an additional slider, halo suppressant, which can help counteract the over effect of sharpening as well. So there's a lot more finesse and tools to it. So structure is great for architectural details.
It's a quick fix.
Details. It's a quick fix. Animal fur, feathers, all of that kind of stuff, but use with caution. Don't expect it to create sharpness where there is no sharpness. So just use it wisely. And again, what you see is what you get. So zoom into 100%, see what it does. Don't go.
The thing to really look out for with and actually let's just show you here. So let's go into 400% and be really cruel. So let's create a new layer because we can do this live. That's kind of cool. I'm just going to draw a bit of mask there, and we're going to call this one structure. And then I'm going to draw another layer with a bit of mask. Let me just get rid of the browser there, and we're going to call that one sharpening. And guess what I'm going to do? So with this one, we're going to put our structure up to 100%. And on this one, we're going to put our sharpening up to not 100%, quite a high amount. Let me set the radius low because we've gone for a high amount. So what you can see already, I've got 3 sliders that control the sharpening, plus I've got this halo suppression tool with sharpening, whereas in structure I've just got on or off effectively, but to a scale. Now in these 2 layers, on the right hand side we have a sharpened version of that, and on the left hand side we've got structure. So what I would say, just looking at it visually, the structure version, in the areas where there's no massive contrast difference, so in other words the buildings, it's done a much better job of pulling out detail, and that's the right thing. So it's pulled out the lines and the structure and so on. But to do that, it's had to darken and lighten and so on. So when you get to a high contrast edge, you get this horrible halo effect if you do it too much. Sharpening on the right hand side, so let's just turn that off there and on. So you can see it hasn't had quite the same effect on the detail in the building. Even if I just draw some more mask on there, it's not, we've covered the building. It hasn't had quite the dramatic change that you can see on this one here. But when it comes to the edges, you haven't also got this horrible halo through something that's been overdone. So it's a more subtle tool. You can't go as far with sharpening as you can with structure, which can be a good or a bad thing depending on what you're what you're trying to do.
And what you can do with structure to avoid that sort of nasty building halo as well, use structure on a layer. So quite often, like I'm thinking back to a landscape shot I did ages ago, had some rocks in it which had lovely detail, but the amount of sharp structure needed to bring that out
was just on the rock.
That halo around the edge. So just the mask stayed,
inside,
in between the lines, if you like, or inside the lines, and then that had the benefit of it. So I think
we did one. Funnily enough, we did it on Monday actually. Funnily enough, it was a seascape with a rock, and it was the same thing. Actually, the rock was slightly out of focus. It was slightly soft, and we used structure just to pull again the inside of the rock up. You don't use structure around the outside because you'll get these halos here. Ralph is a little bit worried. Don't ruin his shot. Don't worry. So number one, we can turn off we can delete the layers. Don't worry, it's all gone back to normal. Calm down. Don't worry, we can go back to that one. There's a question here specifically for David. Are there any plans on having a blur tool?
A blur tool. We have thought about it in the past. And never really got to a yes or no conclusion. Like all new things that come into Capture One, it really depends on who is it going to be useful for, and how many people is it going to be useful for. So, for example, something like a before and after, everybody can use that, has global appeal. Something like healing cloning, we could probably estimate 70 to 80% of people would find that useful. If we go down to something like luminosity masking, that might be something like, 30-40%, but what's the impact balanced against that? Luckily, I don't have to make those decisions. That's the tricky job of product management. But like anything in Capture One, if there's a feature that you find is useful, the best way to do it is don't go onto a forum and rant about it. Well, you can, if it makes you feel better.
From a cathartic perspective, then great.
But then that's a great idea. But the best idea is to actually go to support.capture1.com and say, dear support, I would like to request, etc. You might not get a reply, but anything that comes in that says, I'd love to see an XYZ feature, gets logged into something, an application, I can't remember what it's called, but literally every bit of user feedback goes into a dashboard that we can analyze periodically. So if 10 million people say I'd love to have a blur tool, you're probably going to get a blur tool. So
and actually that's the key thing. It's like we were saying earlier about the support issue for bugs. It's the same thing. If you're the only person that's logging that thing and everyone else is ranting on the forums, of course the guys at Capture One look at forums. But there's nothing scientific there. There's nothing they can say, look, we had 117 requests for this tool this week. And actually, just to really hammer home the point, because every now and then I get a request, as David knows, for support stuff. Can you get hold of Capture One and blah blah blah. I can tell you now what David will tell me. Log a support request, and don't get me wrong, I dislike him sometimes for that. However, I do understand, and actually this is the thing, because of the same reason, there is no point in just trying to fix it in isolation separately from everything else, because no one else in Copenhagen then knows what's going on. So it's really important that if you are doing things where you want to request features or you have a support problem, just get it logged. And there's nothing stopping you then using the forums as well to ask questions, because it may be that it's not really a bug. It may be that it's just a different way of doing it, but genuinely please use the support guys.
And any requests, put them in. And certainly the last couple of releases has been much more user driven, to use a horribly sort of nerdy term. I would say 2 or 3 years ago with Capture One, in terms of new features, it would be a bit of a case of what did we feel internally made the most sense. With not so much disregard of well, is that really what the customer base wants? Because we can all make assumptions, and assumptions are not necessarily the best way to go about things. So what really the past year or two that Alex has been doing, he was my colleague who was on another live broadcast with me, is focus groups, lots of surveys, all these kinds of things to decide what's the main request, and also to balance against the impact and how much R&D time that would take. Because let's say if we wanted to add a blur tool, if that took 24 months of R&D time, is that worth it for the impact? So there's all these kind of plate spinning and so on, which is a very complex job. So, but hopefully the past few releases, like the Heal and Clone, before and after, the new stuff we added in version 20 as well, like blacks and white sliders, was very much a request from the community as well. But please request.
So as well, I've got there's a little bit of a revolt happening about editing a Milky Way shot. Agreed. I'll be willing to share one of my. Yes, please edit a Milky Way. Okay. So there seems to be some request for a Milky Way thing. Next session that we do, I think that's next Monday. We will, in which case, edit this one.
Ooh,
is
nice.
what I've just been clicking around. So this one out of camera looks like significantly different. So for those people that want us to edit a Milky Way, we will do this one next week and have a little play.
Is that one of yours? Or?
It is. However, what I am going to say is I'm going to take these people up on their offers to say, if you want to send one of your images in, it's a Milky Way one, then send it in. We'll have a little play. And for sure, it's actually, Capture One is really, really cool when it comes to playing with Milky Way shots. So we can do that.
If you want a really super nerdy, in-depth webinar on astrophotography, I did one with another photographer, not you, Paul. Sorry.
It's all right. I'm not
Rachel Jones-Ross, and a lot of the webinar, it's not actually about editing, it's about actually getting the shot. So what equipment you should take, what should you wear,
tracking and all the other stuff as well.
Tracking, where should you look in the sky, because I know zilch about astrophotography, so I'm really not the good resource on that. So someone like Paul, someone like Rachel, draw on their expertise for this kind of thing, because editing is one thing, but actually shooting that Milky Way, I imagine, was a whole different challenge in itself.
Yeah, it is. And actually, the reality is, if you forget most of it, as David said, it's planning as well. So planning to be in the right place at the right time, the right angle, and so on. The actual shot settings, honestly, they're the most boring settings you're ever going to come across in your camera. Because there is a recipe for shooting the stars and Milky Way, and it's the right setup. Different one here. Is there a way of saving brush settings as a preset, as in Lightroom?
No, there is not, but it's actually a very good idea.
What there is, however, and we're gonna finish potentially on this one. So don't worry, we will go through other images on Monday. That's not an issue. We're not losing images. We'll catch up to them. But one thing I did want to cover was one of the pro tip videos that we did covers a dust spot finding tool, and great. I haven't yet put the video up that talks about masks, about styles. So I'm just going to cover it very quickly here because it's sort of a follow-on from that. So in Capture One, all of the work that I do on adjustments, I can apply very easily to other images. So I'm going to create a filled adjustment layer just to show you. So we're going to make this horrible. I'm going to put the highlights and whites down, the shadows out. Don't worry, Ralph, this is non-destructive. So we're going to put our saturation up, our contrast down, our brightness down. It's almost worthy of Instagram. We're almost there. Okay. Yeah. So let me just put my browser up so I can see these pictures. Now, this picture here is set. I can right click on that layer and I can say save adjustments as style. Now you can do preset stuff, whatever, but if you've got more than one palette effectively used, then you're going to save it as a style. You can choose which bits of the changes you made you want to copy across as the style. So for example, it doesn't make sense necessarily to put on fringing because you don't know all of your lenses are going to have purple fringing. It doesn't necessarily make sense to change the white balance and color balance because you don't know the white balance and color balance for every image. But in this case, we know that our exposure changes I want to copy and our detail changes I wanted to copy. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to save it as David Paul. It saves it in my styles folder.
Super postcard settings.
Yep. So I then go to any other picture, and I've got two ways of applying the style. First is I can create a new adjustment layer, and I can right click, apply adjustments from, and you'll see in here user styles. Funnily enough, I have a dust spot finder in there, but there's the David Paul one, done. The other way, if I go into my styles tab, under user styles, I've got the style here. This allows me to preview it as well, which is kind of handy as I just move my mouse over. If I right click on the style, I can say either apply to background, be very careful with that, but you can apply it to a new layer. And that new layer then on the top here is a whole new layer, just like I did before, that you can turn on or off. So styles are really handy ways of saving certain setups that you've got. So if you find on a city you're shooting over several days, so you might not want to apply, hit the Command A and just paste the settings. You might only want to use it every now and then. And if you can't remember which one you did it from before, it can be a pain to go back into the catalog, try and find the original image that had the changes that you liked and apply them. So literally just build up your user styles, create styles that work for setups that you know. So if you constantly go out to the same city and shoot in similar situations, and if you find you're always doing the same with the same sliders, save them as a style, and you can save yourself a lot of time.
Cool. Good tip.
Bruce, what was your dust spot style? Good. Excellent segue. So, Bruce.
$9.99 on the Paul Rifle shop.
No, they're completely free. So, go on to YouTube. We've started putting these up from Monday. So, all of the Capture One 20.1 changes are up there, but you'll also find in there things like adding before and after comparisons, healing brushes, Luma ranges. You'll find in there as well the dust spot finder, that's in there. But genuinely, have a look at those guys. They're about 15-20 minutes, and they go in depth in some of the tools. In these sessions, we sort of gloss over certain things. I'm just going to turn that off so we don't upset Ralph too much. So yeah, don't it's not homework. You don't have to go into those guys, but genuinely take a look, because they cover a few things that are kind of handy. Thanks for watching YouTube right now. Choose Facebook. I think that was it for questions. Right, one final question for you then, David. Okay. Which is, because I've seen stuff on the internet, which is, what's the best way of installing the 20.1 update?
Best thing to do is just go to capture1.com, log into your account. There's like a little person icon in the corner, and then you'll see, actually, I probably won't be able to log on because I'm on my user account. Hang on, I'll tell you if
switch to your screen, or
if I can find something. Hang on,
there we are.
So I'm okay with cookies. So this guy up in the top right hand corner, so just go into your account, log in, and then you'll find that you'll be able to see like a bank of squares, and then one of them will say downloads, and just grab the download there. Download, run the installer, and then you're good to go. Pretty much. But
the best bet is, because I've seen different people saying, I've waited for the update to arrive to me magically and whatever. So go to the website, download the installer. And
we're still a little bit old school with the way we do the updates. You don't have to look in the app to check for updates. You can do, but like most companies do when they release an update, they sort of stagger the way the information is sent out just to make sure the server doesn't get walloped with hundreds of thousands of downloads in one hit. So there's two places you'll see in the app, which is the check for updates, and then also in the resource hub, the screen that pops up, or you can find from the help menu. So if I go back to Capture One and we say resource hub, like so, then we've got get your free update here, for example.
That takes you straight there.
So, so they're staggered with the way they come out as well. But as soon as an update is launched, it's immediately available on the website just by logging into your account.
Yeah. Sorry. Before we go, sorry, I'm going over time a little bit. Emil's just asked, because I did forget Emil's question. Let me just go back up to it. I've just got to find it throughout all the people that were telling me yes they could hear David. There we are. Right. How do I create an icon or tab that brings together all tools required for black and white shot development? So, we mean a custom tab up here. Okay.
Yeah. So right click, add tool tab. So right click anywhere, where your tool tabs are, add tool tab, and then right at the bottom you've got custom. So then you can pick a icon of your choice. Let's go for a hammer, sledgehammer edits. Call it, was it Emil, wasn't it? Emil's tools, like so. And add tab, and that just gives you an empty tab, and then you can right click and add any of the tools that you feel is fit for editing black and whites.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool.
And don't forget to save that workspace. Window.
Yes.
Workspace. Save. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's disappointing to somehow lose it.
Cool. So thanks everyone for being on. Those people that want to send files in, especially if you want to do the Milky Way, we'll do a Milky Way challenge next week. I think that sounds quite exciting.
Mars bar challenge.
So go to that. That's a whole different thing in university. I think. So go to that upload tool. You'll see it. paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. Send your raw file in. Please make sure you include your name so that we can use your name rather than X person. But send the files across. We'll edit them, and then when we finished editing them, we'll send you back an EIP. I said I'd cover the EIP very quickly. Basically, an EIP is a packaged version of the original file plus the adjustments that were made in one little container. So when you load it into Capture One, you can see your original and the variant that we create all together with no destruction done. Cool. Okay.
Fabulous.
Right. Thanks, David. We can dispose of fake David now, so that's all cool. All done. I will see everyone probably apart from David on the next session next week. But in the meantime, just send your files in and we'll have a play.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.